It was a bright afternoon in the city of Toronto, the kind where life seemed ordinary and uneventful. Steven Seagal, known worldwide as an action star and martial arts expert, was quietly going about his day. Perhaps it was a routine check, perhaps a misunderstanding, but before he knew it, he was confronted by a group of local police officers. The officers didn't recognize him, or if they did, they didn't care. To them, he was just another man they could intimidate. Without warning, they began mocking him, their laughter loud and home. A few shouted jokes about his age, his calm demeanor, even his long hair, while others grabbed their phones to record the moment. "Look at this guy!" one officer sneered, tugging at Seagal's hair. "Think you're tough, huh?" Seagal's eyes remained steady, his face calm, betraying none of the anger that might have flared in another man. He understood the game they were playing, humiliation, and he knew that reacting impulsively would only make the situation worse. Then came the unthinkable. The officers forced Seagal to sit on a chair in the middle of the station courtyard. One of them pulled out clippers, the buzzing sound filling the air as they began shaving his hair. The crowd that had gathered laughed nervously, unsure if this was a joke or real abuse of authority. Seagal sat still, letting the clippers move through his hair. Every snip a reminder of the officer's arrogance. Despite the ridicule, Seagal's calmness was magnetic. A few bystanders whispered among themselves, "Isn't that Steven Seagal?" But most were too shocked to speak. Others continued recording their phones, capturing every second of the humiliation. Yet even in this moment of extreme embarrassment, Seagal never raised his voice. He didn't curse, didn't fight, didn't try to escape. Instead, he remained composed, almost serene, his presence commanding more attention than the officer's mocking laughter ever could. Little did anyone realize the humiliation that seemed so complete was only the beginning. The laughter, the mockery, the seeming power of the officers, it would all come crashing down in a way no one in that courtyard could have imagined. Dang. Everyone thought this was the end, but they had no idea what was coming next. The sun hung high in the sky, but the courtyard felt anything but bright. Steven Seagal sat in the chair, his head slowly being shaved by the officers. The buzzing of the clippers was deafening, a sound that seemed to mock the calm expression on his face. Each snip of hair falling to the ground felt like a public announcement of the officer's arrogance. Wah! Ha! "Look at him now!" one officer laughed, leaning closer to the camera. Another bystander held, "Bald as a baby!" The crowd had grown since the incident began. A few people whispered, recognizing the famous actor. "Is that Steven Seagal?" "Oh," one teenager asked. Others scoffed. "Nay, just some old guy." Yet even among the doubters, curiosity began to ripple through the audience. People couldn't believe their eyes. Seagal didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't even make a face. His calmness was unsettling to the officers, though they were too arrogant to notice. Each joke they threw at him, each taunt seemed to bounce off him like water off a stone. They were laughing at a man they assumed was powerless, and the man stayed entirely composed. "Say something, old man," an officer sneered. "Say you like this." Seagal remained silent. He looked around the courtyard, making brief eye contact with a few bystanders. His eyes were steady, almost serene, and those who met his gaze felt a strange mixture of respect and discomfort. Nobody had expected the so-called victim to command such presence. Among the onlookers, phones were out. Teenagers, tourists, and local residents captured every second. Some were laughing nervously, unsure whether to join in. Others were clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing, yet nobody dared interfere. The officers were confident in their authority. Jokes continued to fly, but subtle cracks were beginning to show. One of the younger officers glanced nervously at Seagal as if sensing something he couldn't yet name. A few of the bystanders exchanged glances, whispering to one another, "Why isn't he reacting?" At this point, the engagement of the audience grew organically. People in the crowd started talking to one another about the oddity of the situation. Phones captured commentary. "I can't believe this is happening. He's so calm. It's kind of scary. Someone should stop them." Seagal's composure was deliberate. He allowed the officers to think they held all the power. He understood that humiliation was temporary, that true strength often lay in restraint. Each strand of hair that fell to the ground was a reminder of the officers' short-sighted arrogance and the fleeting nature of their control. "Gal!" Even Jeannie, who had been standing nearby from the beginning, whispered worriedly, Steven, please, maybe just let this go. Don't provoke them. Seagal shook his head slightly. He wasn't being provoked. He was observing. He was calculating. And he knew that the moment for his response would come, but it wasn't yet. By now, the crowd had grown even larger. Social media clips were being uploaded live. Comments and reactions began pouring in from viewers across the globe. People from the United States, Canada, the UK, and the Philippines shared their disbelief. "I can't believe the cops are doing this," one typed. "Why is he just sitting there?" wrote another. If you were witnessing this right now, would you step in to help or stay back and watch? Type your answer in the comments below. Also, tell us which country and city you're watching this story from. We'd love to see where viewers are joining from. Despite the ongoing humiliation, Seagal's calmness began to have an effect. A few bystanders started whispering among themselves, questioning the officer's behavior. The nervous energy in the courtyard shifted subtly. The once confident laughter of the officers now carried a faint edge of uncertainty. Seagal allowed the moment to stretch. He didn't need to argue, to resist, or to fight. His presence alone made the situation uncomfortable for the officers, even if they refused to admit it. The truth was starting to sink in. This man, seemingly powerless in the moment, was far from ordinary. And as the final strands of hair fell to the ground, Seagal remained seated, serene and unshaken. The laughter had dominated the courtyard for a while. But soon the tables would turn and silence would fall in a way no one could have predicted. After the last strands of his hair fell to the ground, the courtyard was thick with tension. Ho! The officers stepped back, grinning to themselves, thinking the humiliation was complete. They had laughed, mocked, and asserted their power. And by all appearances, Steven Seagal had been reduced to nothing more than an object of ridicule. But Seagal remained seated, calm as ever. His posture was relaxed, his eyes steady, and his expression betrayed none of the frustration or anger he must have felt. To the officers, it looked like submission. To those paying closer attention, it was something far more powerful. Patience, control, and observation. Seagal scanned the courtyard quietly. He noticed small details the laughing officers had ignored. How one young cop kept glancing nervously at the growing crowd. How another adjusted his uniform repeatedly, as if unconsciously aware that the audience had shifted their attention. How a few bystanders whispered, their expressions changing from amusement to curiosity. Every glance, every gesture, every nervous cough was a clue. He understood something vital. Humiliation, as powerful as it might feel in the moment, is temporary. Power is not demonstrated through mockery or intimidation. It's demonstrated through composure, awareness, and the timing of one's actions. Seagal had learned this from decades of martial arts, acting, and real-world experience, and he intended to use it now. Meanwhile, the crowd's energy had shifted. Initially, many had laughed along with the officers, entertained by what they thought was a spectacle, but now they were uneasy. The laughter felt wrong. A quiet murmur spread. Why isn't he reacting? There's something about the way he's sitting. It's almost like he's in control. Phones continued to record, but the comments streamed in real time. Viewers around the globe noted the tension. Jinky, Seagal's longtime partner, approached quietly. "Steven, maybe we should just leave," she whispered. Her voice trembled with worry. "They're enjoying this too much. It could get worse." Seagal shook his head slightly. "No," he said softly. "They think they have the power. Let them believe it for now. The moment to act will come soon, and it will be on my terms, not theirs, not theirs." The officers continued their jokes, oblivious to the subtle shift in the atmosphere. "Look at him sitting there! He's like a statue! Does he even know this is humiliating?" one shouted, snickering as he pointed toward the cameras recording the moment. A few bystanders exchanged glances. "Something's off," one murmured. "He's not afraid! That was the key!" Seagal's calmness unnerved the officers, though they didn't yet realize it. They assumed compliance meant fear, but in reality, it was the exact opposite. He was observing, calculating, and preparing. Each laugh, each mocking gesture was being filed away, mentally cataloged for the moment when the power dynamic would shift. Social media activity was rising exponentially. Clips of the incident were spreading across multiple platforms. Comments poured in from fans and curious onlookers worldwide. "Why isn't he defending himself? He's so calm. It's almost scary. That's Steven Seagal. I think he's planning something." If you were standing there as a bystander, would you step in to help or stay silent? Type your answer in the comments. Could you remain calm if you were humiliated like this? Let us know below. As the officers continued to mock him, Seagal's mind worked methodically. He noted each officer's arrogance, each lapse in attention, and each sign of insecurity. These small cracks in their confidence would later become decisive. Every gesture, every joke, every nervous glance was ammunition. Not for confrontation now, but for a moment when justice would be undeniable. The crowd, still recording, began to notice the shift. The energy that had once fueled the officers' laughter now hinted at tension, uncertainty, and anticipation. Whispers spread. "I don't think he's gonna fight, but he's definitely not beaten." Seagal's calmness radiated through the courtyard. His body language, still and composed, communicated a quiet but unmistakable message. Humiliation does not define a man. Patience, strategy, and timing do. And as the officers continued their mockery, unaware of what was coming, the stage was set. The calm before the storm had arrived. Little did anyone realize this moment of observation and restraint. The patience Seagal showed while the world laughed would soon become the turning point. When it seemed like a final defeat was only the prelude to an astonishing reversal. The officers' laughter, so loud and confident just moments ago, was about to be silenced forever. Days had passed since the humiliating incident in the courtyard, yet the memory of it lingered. Clips of Steven Seagal being mocked by the officers had gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. People everywhere watched in disbelief. The man, whose calm demeanor had remained unshaken while his hair was shaved, had become a symbol of restraint and quiet power. But for the officers involved, the incident was still a source of smug pride. They had laughed in public and in their private circles, sharing the viral clips among themselves, convinced the story had cemented their dominance. They hadn't considered that the man they humiliated, the seemingly powerless, unflinching man, was anything but ordinary. Seagal, meanwhile, had taken the days to prepare. He had studied the legal nuances of the situation, consulted with colleagues, and quietly contacted key individuals who could ensure that justice would be served. What the officers perceived as submission was actually meticulous planning. Every detail of their arrogance, every smirk, every laugh had been noted and remembered. News of the trial began to circulate. The officers, still confident, saw it as a routine proceeding, assuming it would be nothing more than a formality, but whispers in legal circles suggested something different. The presiding authority of the trial had a reputation for integrity, fairness, and in extraordinary cases, surprising decisiveness. The public didn't yet know it, but the man they had laughed at, the man whose calmness had unnerved them, was about to hold the ultimate authority over them. On the morning of the trial, Seagal entered the courtroom with quiet confidence. The officers were present, unaware of the extent to which their earlier arrogance would now be their undoing. For the first time, the mocking expressions faded. The smug smiles vanished, replaced with tension, unease, and a creeping realization. The man they had humiliated was no longer powerless. Seagal's calm eyes scanned the room. Every gesture he had observed during the humiliation had been carefully cataloged. He knew who had mocked him the most, who had hesitated when no one was looking, who had tried to dominate the moment without thinking about the consequences. He wasn't here to gloat. He was here to ensure that justice was served and that arrogance had consequences. The crowd in the courtroom, including journalists, family members, and bystanders who had followed the viral story, could hardly contain their anticipation. They remembered the footage, the laughter, and the public mockery. Now, the same officers who had laughed so confidently were seated before the man they had humiliated. The reversal of power was palpable. As the trial began, Seagal presided with unwavering composure. His voice was calm but authoritative, each word carrying weight. He did not belittle or mock. He simply allowed the officers' actions to speak for themselves. Every motion, every hesitation, every moment of arrogance recorded during the public humiliation was now part of the formal proceedings. Evidence, testimony, and the recorded videos all painted a clear picture. The officers had overstepped their authority, abused their power, and humiliated a man without cause. The courtroom grew silent as the realization set in. The officers' previous confidence, which had seemed unshakable, now seemed fragile. The laughter that had dominated the courtyard was nowhere to be heard. Instead, a hush fell over the room, broken only by the measured words of Seagal's judgments. Bystanders whispered. Journalists scribbled notes. Who? And viewers following the story online felt the tension through every update. The man they had watched being humiliated, seemingly powerless, now commanded the room. Authority, respect, and dignity. These were the tools Seagal wielded, and they were more powerful than any taunt, any laugh, or any attempt at mockery. Have you ever seen someone humiliated come back stronger? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you were in the courtroom watching this reversal of power, what would your reaction be? Type below! By the end of the first day of proceedings, the officers had begun to understand the magnitude of the situation. Their previous arrogance had blinded them to the fact that humiliation is temporary, but authority, when wielded wisely, lasts. Seagal's calmness, patience, and strategic observation had shifted the balance completely. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread quickly. People shared the story on social media. Remember the guy they shaved? He's now presiding over their trial! Oi! The narrative spread like fire, inspiring awe and respect for Seagal's discipline and intelligence. The moment of revelation was complete. The man they had mocked so openly was no longer a victim. He had turned the tables with precision, patience, and quiet authority. And while the officers had once dominated the narrative through ridicule, they now faced the undeniable power of justice, orchestrated by the very man they had underestimated. Little did anyone know the ultimate climax, the moment when silence would fall completely over the courtroom and the officers was still to come. Seagal's patience had set the stage for a moment so profound it would leave both the courtroom and viewers worldwide speechless. The courtroom was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of papers and the low murmur of the audience. Steven Seagal sat at the bench, calm and composed, radiating a quiet authority that made the very air feel charged. The officers who had mocked him in the courtyard now sat nervously in the defendant's section, their once confident smirks replaced by tight-lipped unease. From the moment the trial began, it was clear that this was not going to be routine. Seagal's presence alone commanded attention. His eyes, steady and piercing, scanned each officer, noting every twitch, every hesitation, every attempt to regain composure. There was no hint of anger, no desire for revenge, only unwavering authority. The first officer, who had been the loudest in the courtyard, attempted a joke as he spoke to the court. Well, I guess things got a little out of hand that day. Seagal's gaze fixed on him, calm but penetrating. You believed humiliation was power. Did you truly think ridicule could define a man? His voice was measured, each word deliberate. The courtroom fell silent. Even the murmurs of the audience ceased. All eyes on the interaction. The officer swallowed hard. The words struck harder than any argument could. He had mocked Seagal openly, convinced of his own superiority, only to find himself confronted by the man he had humiliated. The dynamic had shifted completely. Seagal continued detailing the events in the courtyard with precision. He did not exaggerate, nor did he add drama. The recorded footage and testimonies were sufficient. These actions were not only disrespectful, he said, but a clear abuse of authority. Laughter at the expense of another human being does not absolve one of responsibility. As he spoke, the officer's composure crumbled further. One nervously adjusted his uniform. Another avoided eye contact entirely. Their arrogance, once so palpable, now seemed fragile, like a thin veneer about to crack completely. The audience, including journalists and spectators, leaned forward in anticipation, sensing the gravity of the moment. Seagal's calmness was disarming. Each word he spoke carried authority. Each pause created tension, and each observation highlighted the officer's misconduct. He didn't need to yell or insult. The power of his presence and the clarity of his argument were enough to command respect and instill fear simultaneously. Have you ever witnessed someone completely flip a situation on its head? Share your story in the comments. If you were one of the bystanders watching this courtroom showdown, what would you feel? Type below. The officers tried to respond, fumbling over explanations and half-hearted excuses. Every attempt only further demonstrated their lack of control. Seagal's calm rebuttals exposed the arrogance and carelessness they had displayed in the courtyard. Every laugh they had shared at his expense now echoed as evidence against them. The courtroom audience could feel the tension escalating. People who had once doubted Seagal's strategy now watched in awe. Witnesses who had been present during the humiliation shared their accounts, corroborating the events. The officers' own recording devices, which had once been instruments of ridicule, now served as undeniable evidence of their misconduct. Seagal allowed the moment to stretch, letting the weight of their actions sink in. Silence filled the room, heavier than any insult or taunt could have been. The officers realized, finally, that the man they had laughed at and demeaned was not only unbroken, but now held ultimate authority over their fate. His closing remarks were calm, yet devastating. Humiliation is fleeting. Patience, respect, and integrity endure. Today we are reminded that actions have consequences and authority must be exercised with responsibility and dignity. The words hung in the air, settling over the courtroom like a verdict already spoken. The officers, once confident and mocking, now sat in stunned silence. The laughter that had filled the courtyard days earlier was gone, replaced by an almost tangible tension, the silence of reckoning. Even the audience, both in the courtroom and watching online, could feel the shift. Clips and updates were being shared in real time, with viewers commenting on the dramatic reversal. He didn't raise a hand, didn't yell, and yet he completely owned the room. That's what patience and strategy look like. Seagal's calm, authoritative presence had completely turned the situation around. The officers who had thought they held all the power were now powerless, exposed, and humbled. What had begun as public mockery had transformed into a courtroom spectacle of respect, strategy, and justice. By the end of this session, it was clear the laughter had ended and a new order had been established. Seagal had not only reclaimed his dignity, but had also reminded everyone present of a simple truth. True authority is not taken through fear or ridicule, but earned through patience, intelligence, and moral clarity. The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on the bench where Steven Seagal sat, composed and commanding. The officers, who had once laughed openly at him in the courtyard, now faced the full weight of the situation. Their smirks, once confident and mocking, had vanished. Each twitch of the fingers, each hesitant glance betrayed the realization that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Seagal allowed the proceedings to move methodically. He listened carefully as testimonies were delivered, evidence was reviewed, and the video clips of the courtyard humiliation were replayed. Every detail of the officer's arrogance, every cruel laugh and mocking gesture was meticulously documented and presented. The public watching live or through social media was riveted. The viral clips that once elicited laughter now elicited a profound sense of justice. The presiding moment arrived when Seagal addressed the courtroom. His voice, calm but firm, carried across the room. "Authority carries responsibility," he said. "Power is not measured by who can humiliate others, but by who acts with integrity and respect. Today, we are here to hold accountable those who abuse that responsibility." Hey! A silence fell that was deeper than any quiet that had preceded it. The officers shifted uneasily in their seats. The realization of their own misconduct, once dismissed lightly as a joke, now confronted them like a mirror they could not escape. Seagal didn't need to raise his voice. His composure alone commanded attention. He laid out the consequences carefully, detailing the disciplinary actions and potential professional ramifications the officers would face. It was not a personal vendetta. It was the law and morality exacting their due. One officer tried to protest, stammering, "We didn't mean any harm." Seagal's gaze, steady and piercing, cut through the excuse. "Intent does not erase impact. Laughter at the expense of another's dignity is not harmless. It is a breach of trust, a violation of the responsibility entrusted to you." The courtroom erupted with quiet whispers. Spectators, journalists, and even the officers themselves felt the weight of the words. It was the moment where ridicule met accountability, and the power dynamics had shifted entirely. Those who had once held the upper hand now sat humbled, exposed before the law and the public eye. Have you ever seen someone humiliated come back stronger and wiser? Share your story in the comments below. If you were one of the bystanders in the courtroom, how would you have felt watching the officers face justice? Type your answer! Seagal's calm demeanor throughout the proceedings only amplified the effect. His measured words and patient strategy had transformed what began as a public spectacle of humiliation into a demonstration of dignity, justice, and authority. Every bystander, every viewer online could sense the shift. This was more than a trial. It was a lesson in integrity. The officers, facing both legal consequences and professional scrutiny, could no longer hide behind arrogance or laughter. Their authority, once taken for granted, had been challenged and undone by someone they had underestimated. The public and the media celebrated not only Seagal's victory, but the moral clarity of the outcome. It was a triumph, not just for him, but for anyone who had ever been mocked or humiliated unjustly. Even as the officers were formally reprimanded and disciplinary actions were confirmed, Seagal remained composed. He did not gloat. He did not deliver a speech of vengeance. He simply allowed the consequences to speak for themselves. The courtroom, which had once been filled with nervous laughter from the officers, now resonated with silence, a profound acknowledgement of justice done. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. Social media exploded with praise for Seagal's restraint and strategy. Fans, commentators, and viewers around the world shared clips of the trial, marveling at how the man who had been humiliated had used patience, intelligence, and calm authority to turn the situation around. Headlines celebrated the story. Steven Seagal turns tables on mocking officers. Humiliation to justice. Seagal's calm triumph. By the end of the day, the lesson was clear. Humiliation is temporary. Integrity and strategy endure. Seagal's quiet strength had transformed an embarrassing moment into a resounding victory for justice. The officers, once laughing and mocking, had been humbled in a way that the world could see. And for every viewer following the story, the message was unmistakable. True power lies not in fear, ridicule, or laughter at others, but in patience, strategy, and moral authority. By the time the courtroom doors closed, the story of Steven Seagal and the officers who had once humiliated him had already spread across social media like wildfire. Clips of the viral courtyard incident, combined with footage from the trial, were being shared by millions of viewers worldwide. People couldn't stop talking about it. Say! The calm, strategic response of a man who had been mocked and ridiculed, now presiding over the very individuals who had humiliated him. News outlets picked up the story immediately. Headlines range from the dramatic Steven Seagal silences, mocking officers in courtroom triumph, to the reflective patience, strategy, and justice, the Seagal effect. Videos racked up millions of views within hours on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Viewers commented, debated, and expressed awe at how Seagal had handled the situation. "What a masterclass in restraint," wrote one fan. "I was laughing at the clips, but now this is inspiring," another posted. "Humiliation turned into a lesson in patience and authority. Wow," said someone from Manila. Even those who had initially questioned the situation, the bystanders, social media viewers, and casual fans, were captivated. They were witnessing a rare phenomenon. Someone publicly humiliated, underestimated, and mocked, demonstrating that dignity and strategic patience could outmatch arrogance and ridicule. The officers, meanwhile, faced consequences both publicly and professionally. Internal investigations confirmed misconduct and disciplinary measures were enforced. Their authority, once assumed to be absolute, had been irrevocably challenged. They had been reminded in the most public and undeniable way that mockery and arrogance carry consequences. Seagal, however, remained the model of calm composure. In interviews following the trial, he emphasized the importance of patience, dignity, and moral authority. "It's not about revenge," he explained. "It's about standing firm, maintaining your integrity, and allowing justice to take its course." Power is measured by restraint as much as by action. The global audience responded overwhelmingly. Millions commented, shared, and reposted clips, praising the story as a modern example of humility and strength. From Manila to New York, London to Los Angeles, viewers were inspired by the transformation of what seemed like a moment of humiliation into an unforgettable lesson in justice. Have you ever faced humiliation and turned it into a triumph? Share your story in the comments below. If you believe that true power comes from patience, dignity, and integrity, type respect in the comments. Seagal's story resonated far beyond the courtroom. It became a case study in leadership, resilience, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. Fans and commentators alike noted the stark contrast between the officer's temporary arrogance and Seagal's enduring strength. Where once there had been laughter, there was now admiration and respect. Schools, leadership forums, and online communities began referencing the incident as an example of how patience, strategy, and moral clarity can turn seemingly hopeless situations into victories. The narrative had shifted completely. The story was no longer about humiliation. It was about triumph through composure and calculated action. Even the bystanders who had watched the courtyard incident unfold felt a sense of awe and vindication. Many admitted decided they had underestimated Seagal's calm demeanor, only to learn that true authority is not wielded through fear, ridicule, or mockery, but through patience, observation, and moral certainty. In the weeks that followed, the story continued to trend worldwide. Videos of Seagal calmly presiding over the trial circulated endlessly, often accompanied by captions highlighting the power of restraint and the inevitability of justice. It became clear that the man who had been humiliated had not only reclaimed his dignity, but also set an example for millions, a reminder that true strength lies not in immediate retaliation, but in patience, strategy, and integrity. And so the final lesson echoed across the globe. Those who mock and ridicule may have the momentary power, but those who act with wisdom, patience, and moral clarity will ultimately command respect. Steven Seagal had turned humiliation into triumph, and the world had watched in awe.